The dust had barely settled on Nora Owens' footprints when her father's final words still burned in her ears like a brand against bare skin. She stumbled along the rutted wagon road that led away from Walla Walla, Washington. Her only possessions a threadbare shawl, the dress on her back, and a small bundle containing a Bible and 2 biscuits wrapped in cloth. The August sun of 1882 beat down mercilessly on her uncovered head, and she could feel the heat rising from the parched earth through the thin soles of her boots. Behind her, the town she had known for all 21 years of her life grew smaller with each agonizing step, and she refused to look back at the place that had cast her out like refuse. Her crime had been simple enough. She had refused to marry Cyrus Melbourne, the wealthy mine owner who had decided that Nora would make a suitable third wife after his second had died in childbirth the previous winter. Cyrus was 53 years old with hands like slabs of ham, and a temperament that matched the whiskey perpetually on his breath. When Nora's father, desperate to settle his gambling debts, had agreed to the arrangement without consulting her, Nora had stood in their small cabin and said the word that would change everything. No, that single syllable had cost her everything. Her father had raged, her mother had wept. The town preacher had been summoned to speak to her about wifely duty and obedience, though she was not yet any man's wife. Cyrus himself had visited, alternating between promises of fine dresses and thinly veiled threats. But Nora had inherited her grandmother's stubborn streak, and she would not be moved. After 2 weeks of mounting pressure, her father had made his pronouncement at dawn that very morning. She was no daughter of his. She had until noon to leave Walla Walla and never return. She had not believed him until she saw her few belongings thrown into the dirt outside their cabin door. Now, 3 hours past noon, Nora walked with no destination in mind. The road stretched endlessly before her, cutting through golden grasslands that rolled like waves toward distant blue mountains. Occasionally, a wagon would pass, and she would step aside, keeping her eyes down. She had no plan beyond keeping her feet moving and hoping that the next town might offer work to a young woman with no references and no family. Perhaps she could find employment as a seamstress or a cook. Perhaps a farmer's wife might need help with children. Perhaps she would simply collapse in the road, and the buzzards circling overhead would solve all her problems. The sun was beginning its descent when she heard hoofbeats approaching from behind. She moved to the side of the road without looking up, expecting the rider to pass. Instead, the horse slowed, and a shadow fell across her path. "Miss, are you all right?" The voice was deep and carried genuine concern rather than the predatory interest she had learned to recognize. Nora looked up, shading her eyes against the lowering sun. The man on horseback was silhouetted against the golden light, but she could make out a tall frame, broad shoulders, and a hat pulled low over his face. He sat his horse with the easy confidence of someone who had spent more time in the saddle than on foot. "I'm fine, thank you," Nora said, though her cracked lips and sun-burned face likely told a different story. "Just traveling." The rider shifted and she got a better look at him. He was younger than she had first thought, perhaps 25 or 26, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of creek water in shadow. His face was tanned from outdoor work, with strong features that might have been carved from the basalt cliffs that dotted the region. He wore working clothes, a dusty shirt and worn leather vest, with a gun belt slung around his hips in the practical way of men who actually used their weapons for hunting rather than intimidation. Traveling on foot, without supplies or a horse. He glanced at the empty road stretching in both directions. "The next town is 15 miles east, and there's nothing but ranch land to the west for 30 miles or more. Then I suppose I have a long walk ahead of me, Nora said, trying to sound braver than she felt. She began walking again, though her feet ached abominably and she could feel blisters forming. The horse kept pace with her slow progress. "I don't mean to pry into your business, miss, but it's going to be dark in a few hours. The road isn't safe after nightfall. We get wolves down from the mountains, and last week a cougar took down a calf not 5 miles from here." Nora stopped walking. She was tired, thirsty, and frightened, and the weight of her circumstances pressed down on her shoulders like a physical burden. "I appreciate your concern, sir, but I have very few options available to me at present. Unless you're offering to fly me to the next town, I believe I'll have to take my chances with the wolves." Something flickered in his eyes. Amusement, perhaps, or respect. "My name is Ryan Ingram. My family has a ranch about 2 miles west of here. We have a bunkhouse with an empty room that my sister used before she married and moved to Portland. You're welcome to stay there while you figure out your next steps. My mother would have my hide if I left a lady stranded on the road." Nora studied him carefully. She had learned to read men in the past few weeks, to watch for the signs of ulterior motives. But Ryan Ingram's face showed only honest concern, and there was something steady in his gaze that made her want to trust him. Still, she hesitated. "I don't accept charity, Mr. Ingram. I have no money to pay for lodging." "The room is empty anyway," he said simply. "And if it troubles your conscience, my mother could probably use help in the kitchen. She's been doing all the cooking for the ranch hands herself since our cook quit last month to try his luck in the silver mines." "Can you cook?" "Yes," Nora said. She could do more than cook. She could bake bread that rose light as clouds, stew meat until it fell from the bone, and make preserves that lasted through the winter. Her mother had taught her well, even if those skills had not been enough to make her a desirable daughter. "Then we'll call it an even trade. Room and board in exchange for kitchen help." Ryan held out his hand. "Do we have an agreement?" Nora looked at his outstretched hand, then at the empty road ahead, then back at his face. She thought of wolves and cougars and the coming darkness. She thought of her aching feet and empty stomach. She thought of how she had nothing left to lose that had not already been taken from her. She reached up and shook his hand. His palm was calloused and warm, his grip firm but careful. "Nora Owens. And yes, Mr. Ingram, we have an agreement." He smiled, and it transformed his serious face into something more approachable. "Call me Ryan. Mr. Ingram is my father. Now, let's get you to the ranch before my mother starts worrying about why I'm late for supper." He swung down from his horse with easy grace and held out the reins. "You take the horse, I'll walk." "I can walk," Nora protested. "It's your horse. And I've been sitting on him all day checking fence lines. My legs could use the stretch. Besides, you look like you're about to fall over, and I'm not sure I could catch you and hold the horse at the same time." His tone was matter-of-fact rather than pitying, which made it easier to accept. Nora had not ridden much, but she managed to get herself into the saddle with some undignified scrambling. The relief of being off her feet was immediate and profound. Ryan took the reins and began leading the horse down the road at an easy pace. "So," he said after a moment of companionable silence, "are you running from something or toward something?" "Does it matter?" Nora asked. "Not particularly, just making conversation." She considered not answering, but something about the steady rhythm of the horse's gait and the calm presence of the man walking beside her loosened her tongue. "Running from, I suppose. Or rather, I was thrown from. My father banished me from Walla Walla this morning." If Ryan was shocked, he did not show it. "That seems extreme. What did you do, rob a bank? Worse, I refused to marry the man he chose for me." The bitterness in her voice surprised her. "Ah." Ryan was quiet for a moment. "I take it your father disagreed with your choice. My father had debts. Cyrus Melbourne offered to forgive them if I would marry him. He already buried 2 wives, and I suspect he was looking for a third to work herself to death keeping his house." Nora looked down at her hands, clutching the saddle horn. "I said no. My father said I was no longer his daughter. So here I am." "Here you are," Ryan agreed. He glanced up at her, and in the slanting sunlight his eyes were kind. "For what it's worth, I think you made the right choice. A marriage without willing consent on both sides is no marriage at all." The preacher didn't see it that way. "With respect to your preacher, he's not the one who would have had to live with the man." Ryan adjusted his hat against the sun. "My parents married for love. Caused a scandal at the time because my mother's family wanted her to marry a banker from Seattle. She chose my father instead, who was just a ranch hand with a dream of owning his own land. 30 years later, they're still happy. That's how it should be." They turned off the main road onto a smaller track that wound between rolling hills dotted with grazing cattle. Nora could see a cluster of buildings in the distance, nestled in a valley where a line of cottonwoods marked the presence of a creek. The main house was a solid timber structure with a wide porch, and nearby stood a large barn, several outbuildings, and a long, low structure that must be the bunkhouse. "The Running Eye Ranch," Ryan said, noting the direction of her gaze. "My grandfather homesteaded this land in 1855. Built the first cabin where the barn stands now. My father expanded the operation, and now we run about 500 head of cattle, plus horses." There was pride in his voice, the kind that came from generations of hard work and love of the land. As they approached, a woman emerged from the main house, wiping her hands on an apron. She was in her early 50s with dark hair streaked with silver, and the same creek water eyes as her son. When she saw Ryan leading the horse with a strange woman in the saddle, her expression shifted from curiosity to concern. "Ryan, is everything all right?" "Everything's fine, Ma. This is Miss Nora Owens. Found her walking the road from Walla Walla with no supplies and nowhere to go. I told her she could stay in Sarah's old room in exchange for helping you in the kitchen." Ryan helped Nora dismount, steadying her when she stumbled on stiff legs. Mrs. Ingram's sharp eyes took in Nora's sunburned face, worn clothes, and exhausted posture in a single glance. Whatever she saw there softened her expression. "Of course she can stay. Ryan, take care of your horse and then wash up for supper. Miss Owens, come with me. You look like you could use some water and a place to sit down before you fall down." "Thank you, Mrs. Ingram," Nora managed. "I'm very grateful for your hospitality." "Call me Margaret," the older woman said briskly. "And don't thank me yet. I'm going to work you hard if you really can cook. I've been feeding 8 men 3 meals a day for the past month, and I'm about worn through. Can you make biscuits?" "Yes, madam." "Good ones?" "Light and flaky. My mother's recipe won first prize at the county fair 3 years running." Margaret smiled. "Then you and I are going to get along just fine. Come inside." The house was simple but well kept, with polished wood floors and curtains in the windows. Margaret led Nora through a sitting room and into a large kitchen that smelled of coffee and bacon. A pump stood over a deep sink, and a cast iron stove radiated heat from one wall. Margaret poured water from a pitcher into a tin cup and handed it to Nora. "Drink slowly," she advised. "You're dehydrated. When you're done, I'll show you where you'll be staying." Nora sipped the water, which was cool and tasted faintly of minerals. It was the best thing she had drunk in her entire life. When the cup was empty, Margaret refilled it and then led her back outside to the bunkhouse. The building was divided into sections. The main area held bunks for the ranch hands, but at the far end was a separate room with its own door. "This was my daughter Sarah's room when she lived here," Margaret explained, opening the door. "She married a lawyer from Portland last spring and moved there with him. The room's been empty since then." The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed covered in a colorful quilt, a dresser, a washstand with a basin and pitcher, and a window that looked out toward the mountains. To Nora, who had expected nothing, it looked like luxury. "There are some of Sarah's old clothes in the dresser," Margaret continued. "You look to be about the same size as her. You're welcome to anything you find useful. There's a bathing room in the main house that you can use, and I'll have Ryan bring hot water after supper so you can wash up properly." She paused, her expression gentling. "I don't know what brought you to our door, Miss Owens, but you're safe here. No one on this ranch will harm you or judge you. We believe in honest work and fair dealing, and that's all we ask of anyone." Nora felt her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. "Thank you," she whispered. "You don't know what this means to me." "I can guess," Margaret said quietly. "I've been young and afraid before, though under different circumstances. Now rest for a few minutes. Supper is in an hour, and you'll meet the rest of the household then." After Margaret left, Nora sat on the edge of the bed and let herself cry for the first time since her father's pronouncement. She cried for the family she had lost, for the fear of the unknown, and for the overwhelming relief of finding temporary haven. When the tears subsided, she washed her face in the basin, braided her tangled hair as best she could, and opened the dresser to see what Sarah Ingram had left behind. The clothes were simple but well made. Several cotton dresses in practical colors, an extra apron, a warm shawl, and even a pair of boots that were only slightly too large. Nora changed into a clean dress, marveling at the feeling of fresh fabric against her skin. The dress was a soft blue that made her eyes look more gray than hazel, and for the first time that day, she felt almost human again. When she emerged from her room, the sun was setting in a blaze of orange and gold, painting the mountains in shades of purple and crimson. She found her way back to the main house, where voices and the clatter of dishes suggested supper was underway. She knocked hesitantly on the door frame. Come in, Margaret called. "Don't stand on ceremony, you live here now." The kitchen table had been extended to its full length and was surrounded by men in various states of cleanliness. They all looked up when Nora entered, their conversations dying away. Ryan stood at the head of the table and gestured to an empty chair beside him. "Gentlemen, this is Miss Nora Owens. She'll be helping my mother in the kitchen, so I expect you all to treat her with the same respect you'd show your own sisters. Anyone who forgets that will answer to me." His tone was pleasant but carried an edge that suggested he meant every word. "Yes, boss," came a ragged chorus of replies. An older man at the far end of the table rose and inclined his head toward Nora. "Miss Owens, I'm Robert Ingram, Ryan's father. Welcome to the Running Eye." Robert Ingram was a weathered version of his son, with the same strong features and steady presence, though his hair was entirely gray and his face was lined from years of outdoor work. He had the look of a man who had built something with his own hands and was proud of it. "Thank you, Mr. Ingram," Nora said. "Your wife and son have been very kind to me." "It's no more than Christian charity," Robert said, "and considerably less than you'll earn if you can cook half as well as Margaret says you claim." "I'll let my cooking speak for itself," Nora replied, taking her seat. The chair next to Ryan gave her an odd sense of protection, as if his presence formed a barrier between her and the curious stares of the ranch hands. Supper was a hearty affair of beef stew, corn bread, and dried apple pie. The men ate with the focused intensity of people who had worked hard all day. pausing occasionally to ask Ryan or his father about the next day's tasks. Nora learned that 4 of the men were permanent hands who lived in the bunkhouse year-round, while 3 more had been hired for the season to help with the cattle drive that would happen in the fall. The conversation flowed around her, and Nora was content to listen and observe. The men treated each other with the easy camaraderie of people who work together toward common goals, trading jokes and insults in equal measure. Ryan participated but also clearly held authority, and when he spoke, the others listened. He had the kind of natural leadership that did not need to assert itself loudly because it was simply assumed. After supper, true to her word, Margaret put Nora to work. Together they washed dishes in the big kitchen sink while Robert and Ryan went to check on a mare that was close to foaling. Margaret chatted easily as they worked, asking gentle questions about Nora's skills and experience without prying into her past. "Can you handle breakfast for 10 men?" Margaret asked, handing Nora a plate to dry. "Yes. What time do they eat?" 5:30. "They're in the saddle by 6 during the summer. You'll need to have coffee ready by 5 for the early risers." Margaret glanced at her. "I know it's early, but you'll get used to it." "I'm accustomed to early mornings," Nora assured her. In truth, she was accustomed to far worse things than early mornings, and the prospect of useful work was more appealing than daunting. "Good. We'll work together for a few days until you learn the routine, and then I'll leave most of the meals to you. I'll still help with the big dinners and the baking, but the day-to-day cooking will be your responsibility. Does that sound acceptable?" "More than acceptable. I'm grateful for the opportunity." Margaret set down the pot she was scrubbing and looked at Nora directly. "You don't need to be quite so grateful, my dear. This is honest work for honest pay. You're not a charity case. You're an employee, and a necessary one at that. The men have been complaining about my cooking for weeks." Despite herself, Nora smiled. "Somehow I doubt that." "Then you haven't tasted my biscuits," Margaret said with a laugh. "I'm a competent cook, but I've never had the touch for baking. My biscuits could be used to build walls. Sarah inherited her grandmother's talent, but she's in Portland now living her own life. So you see, you're doing us as much of a favor as we're doing you." Later, after the dishes were done and Margaret had shown her where everything was kept in the kitchen, Nora returned to her small room in the bunkhouse. True to Margaret's promise, there was a hip bath waiting with a bucket of hot water and fresh towels. Nora locked the door, stripped off her borrowed dress, and sank into the bath with a sigh of pure relief. As she scrubbed away the dust and sweat of her terrible day, she let herself think about Ryan Ingram. He had saved her, though she suspected he would not see it that way. He would say he had simply done what any decent person would do. But Nora knew better. Many men would have ridden past. Some would have stopped with worse intentions. Ryan had offered help with no strings attached, and his family had welcomed her without judgment. She thought about his eyes, so steady and kind. She thought about the way he had walked beside his horse for 2 miles rather than let her continue on foot. She thought about how he had introduced her to the ranch hands in a way that made clear she was under his protection. She thought about all these things and told herself firmly that gratitude was not the same as affection, and affection was not the same as love. She had known Ryan Ingram for only a few hours. Whatever she felt was simply the natural result of relief and exhaustion. But as she climbed into the narrow bed and pulled the quilt up to her chin, she found herself replaying every moment of their conversation, examining each word for meaning. The last thought she had before sleep claimed her was of his smile and how it had made her feel safe for the first time in weeks. Nora woke to darkness and the sound of roosters crowing. For a moment she was disoriented, expecting to see the familiar walls of her father's cabin. Then memory returned in a rush, bringing both pain and relief. She was at the Running Eye Ranch. She was safe, and she had a job to do. She dressed quickly in the dim light of pre-dawn, pinning her hair up in a practical bun, and made her way to the main house. To her surprise, she found Margaret already in the kitchen with the stove lit and coffee brewing. "Good morning," Margaret said. "I thought I'd get you started on your first morning. Tomorrow you'll be on your own." Together they prepared a breakfast of bacon, eggs, fried potatoes, oatmeal, and biscuits. Nora made the biscuits using her mother's recipe, working the dough with quick, practiced hands. When the first batch came out of the oven, golden and flaky, Margaret broke one open and tasted it. "Oh," she said. "Oh, these are wonderful. The men are going to love you." The men did love the biscuits, judging by how quickly they disappeared. Nora stood at the stove, cooking eggs to order and refilling coffee cups, while the ranch hands filed through expressing their appreciation between mouthfuls of food. Ryan was the last to arrive, his hair still damp from washing and his shirt buttoned hastily. "Sorry I'm late," he said to his mother. "The mare foaled last night, a colt, healthy and strong." "That's wonderful news," Margaret said. "Sit down and eat before it gets cold." Ryan took the same seat he had occupied at supper, and Nora set a plate in front of him without being asked. Their eyes met briefly, and he smiled at her. "Thank you. Did you sleep well?" "Very well, thank you. The room is perfect." She poured coffee for him and then returned to the stove to flip bacon. The morning routine established itself quickly. After breakfast, the men headed out to their various tasks while Nora and Margaret cleaned up and began preparations for the midday dinner. Margaret showed her the pantry, which was well stocked with staples, and the root cellar, which held vegetables and preserved goods. They discussed menus and preferences, with Margaret explaining that the men preferred hearty, simple food and plenty of it. "They'll eat just about anything after a day of working cattle," Margaret said, "but they appreciate variety. We have chickens, so eggs are plentiful. We butcher our own beef and pork. I keep a kitchen garden with vegetables and herbs. In the fall, we'll do a big preserving effort, putting up enough food to last through the winter." The days fell into a pattern. Nora rose before dawn to make breakfast, served the midday dinner at noon, and prepared supper for 6 in the evening. Between meals, she baked bread, did laundry, and helped Margaret with the endless tasks required to keep a working ranch running smoothly. The work was hard, but it was honest work, and she went to bed each night with the satisfied exhaustion of someone who had earned her rest. The ranch hands grew accustomed to her presence and began treating her like a younger sister, teasing her gently and competing for her approval with exaggerated compliments about her cooking. She learned their names and preferences. Old Tom, who liked extra salt on everything; young Jamie, who was shy and blushed whenever she spoke to him; Carlos, who taught her Spanish words while she taught him better English; and Sam, who played the fiddle after supper sometimes and filled the evening air with music. But it was Ryan who occupied her thoughts more than she wanted to admit. She saw him at meals and sometimes in the evenings when he would stop by the kitchen to discuss the next day's schedule with his mother. He was unfailingly polite and kind, but he kept a certain distance, treating her with the same respect he showed all women. Nora told herself this was appropriate and proper. She told herself she should not hope for anything more. She told herself many things, but her heart refused to listen. 2 weeks after her arrival, Ryan asked if she would like to see the new colt. "You've been working so hard," he said, "and the foal is in the paddock near the house. I thought you might enjoy a break." Nora accepted with perhaps more eagerness than was dignified, and they walked together to the paddock in the soft light of early evening. The mare was a beautiful chestnut, and the colt was all legs and curiosity, investigating everything with wide-eyed wonder. "He's perfect," Nora breathed, watching the colt nurse. "He'll be a good horse when he's trained," Ryan agreed. "We breed for temperament as much as conformation. A horse with a bad temper is dangerous, no matter how fast or strong it is." They leaned on the fence rail together, watching the horses. Nora was acutely aware of Ryan's proximity, of the warmth radiating from his body and the strength evident in his forearms where his sleeves were rolled up. She could smell the clean scent of soap and leather and something else that was uniquely him. "Are you happy here?" Ryan asked suddenly. "I mean, is this arrangement working out for you?" "Yes," Nora said honestly. "Your mother is wonderful to work with and I enjoy the cooking. It feels good to be useful." "You're more than useful. You're talented. Those biscuits you made yesterday were better than anything I've eaten in a restaurant." He paused. "I just want to make sure you're not feeling trapped or obligated. If you want to move on to something else, we can help you find a position in town." "I don't want to leave," Nora said, perhaps too quickly. "Unless you want me to go." "No." Ryan turned to face her, his expression earnest. "That's not what I meant at all. I just wanted you to know that you have options. You're not stuck here just because I found you on the road that day." "I know that," Nora said softly. "But honestly, Ryan, I'm happier here than I've been in a long time, maybe ever. Your family has given me something I didn't know I needed, a place where I can just be myself without having to constantly guard against judgment or coercion." Something shifted in Ryan's expression, a softening around his eyes. "Good," he said. "I'm glad, because I like having you here, we all do." "All?" Nora asked, trying to keep her tone light. "Well, yes. My mother says you've halved her workload. My father says the men are in better mood since they've been eating decent food, and the hands would probably riot if you left now and took your biscuits with you." "And what about you?" The question escaped before Nora could stop it, and she felt her cheeks heat with embarrassment. "I mean, personally, how do you feel about it?" Ryan was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the paddock. When he spoke, his voice was careful. "I think you're one of the bravest people I've ever met. You stood up for what you believed in, even when it cost you everything. That takes courage, and I think anyone would be lucky to call you a friend." Friend. The word should have pleased her. Instead, it felt like a door closing. "Thank you," she said, struggling to keep disappointment from her voice. "I'm glad we're friends." They stood in companionable silence for a while longer, watching the colt explore his small world. But something had shifted between them, a recognition of boundaries that Nora had not realized existed until that moment. When they walked back to the house, the physical distance between them felt wider than before. That night, lying in her narrow bed, Nora admitted to herself what she had been avoiding for 2 weeks. She was falling in love with Ryan Ingram. She loved his steadiness and his kindness. She loved the way he treated everyone with respect, from the youngest ranch hand to his aging father. She loved his quiet competence and the way he smiled when he thought no one was watching. She loved 100 small things about him, and the knowledge sat heavy in her chest because she was quite certain he did not feel the same way. He had rescued her. He had given her employment. He called her brave and counted her as a friend. But there had been nothing in his words or actions to suggest he saw her as anything more. And why would he? She was a woman who had been banished by her own family, a charity case who had arrived with nothing, and was now wearing his sister's old clothes and sleeping in his sister's old room. She was hardly a romantic prospect for a man who owned a successful ranch and could probably court any woman in the territory. Nora rolled over and pressed her face into the pillow, willing herself not to cry. She had made her choice when she refused to marry Cyrus Melbourne. She had chosen freedom and self-determination over security and belonging. She could not regret that choice, even if it meant she would never have the kind of love she was beginning to crave. Some things were more important than happiness, and self-respect was one of them. But oh, it hurt anyway. The next morning, Nora threw herself into her work with renewed determination. If she could not have Ryan's love, she would at least earn his respect and his family's gratitude. She experimented with new recipes, making the meals more varied and interesting. She organized the pantry and found ways to reduce waste. She helped Margaret with mending and cleaning, taking on extra tasks without being asked. She made herself indispensable because being needed was better than being dismissed. August gave way to September, and the weather began to change. The days were still warm, but the nights grew cool, and the aspens in the mountains started showing hints of gold. The ranch work intensified as preparations began for the fall cattle drive. Additional hands were hired temporarily, which meant more mouths to feed and more work in the kitchen. Nora welcomed the increased workload. It left less time for thinking and even less time for the awkward moments when she and Ryan would find themselves alone together. She had become adept at reading his schedule and arranging her tasks to minimize their private interactions. It was easier this way, she told herself. Less painful, but Margaret noticed. One afternoon, while they were making pies for supper, the older woman said casually, "You've been avoiding my son." Nora's hand stilled on the dough she was rolling. "I haven't been avoiding anyone, I've just been busy." "So busy that you can't spare 5 minutes to talk to him when he comes looking for you." Margaret's tone was gentle but knowing. "So busy that you eat your own meals in the kitchen instead of at the table with the family." "I eat with the hands," Nora protested weakly. "You eat after the hands alone. There's a difference." Margaret set down her paring knife and turned to face Nora. "What happened between you two?" "Nothing happened. That's the problem." The words came out more bitter than Nora intended, and she immediately regretted them. "I'm sorry." "That was inappropriate." "It was honest," Margaret corrected. "And there's nothing wrong with honest feelings. Do you care for him?" Nora wanted to deny it to protect herself from the vulnerability of confession. But Margaret's eyes were kind, and the urge to tell someone the truth was overwhelming. "Yes," she whispered. "But he doesn't feel the same way. He made it clear that he sees me as a friend, nothing more." Margaret made a small, exasperated sound. "Men can be remarkably stupid about their own feelings, and my son is no exception. He's been moping around the ranch for weeks, finding excuses to be near the house, asking me if you're happy here, and generally acting like a lovesick calf. But he's convinced himself that you're fragile after what happened with your family, and that the last thing you need is romantic pressure from the man who took you in." Nora's heart skipped a beat. "He said that." "Not in so many words, but I know my son. He's trying to be honorable and give you space to heal. What he doesn't realize is that by pulling away, he's hurting you both." Margaret reached across the table and squeezed Nora's flour-dusted hand. "Talk to him. Tell him how you feel. You were brave enough to refuse a marriage you didn't want. Be brave enough to pursue one you do want. What if he doesn't want me? Then you'll know and you can move forward. But Nora, I've seen the way he looks at you when he thinks no one is watching. I've seen how his whole face lights up when you enter a room. That boy is head over heels for you, even if he's too stubborn to admit it. Don't let pride or fear rob you both of something beautiful." That evening, after supper was served and the dishes were washed, Nora went looking for Ryan. She found him in the barn, checking on the horses before bed. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she approached, and she had to force herself to keep walking when every instinct screamed at her to run away. "Ryan." He turned at the sound of her voice, surprise and pleasure flickering across his face. "Nora, is everything all right?" I need to talk to you if you have a few minutes. Of course. Always. He set down the brush he had been using on one of the horses and gave her his full attention. What's on your mind now that she was here? The carefully rehearsed words fled from Nora's mind. She stood in the golden lamplight of the barn, breathing in the scent of hay and horses, and tried to find the courage Margaret had insisted she possessed. I've been avoiding you, she said finally. And I'm sorry. It wasn't fair to you or to your family, but I need to explain why. Ryan's expression grew concerned. Have I done something to make you uncomfortable? Because if I have, I apologize. I never meant to. No, Nora interrupted. You haven't done anything wrong. That's part of the problem. You've been nothing but kind and respectful and honorable, and I'm afraid I've developed feelings that go beyond friendship. The barn went very quiet. Even the horses seemed to sense the weight of the moment and stilled. What kind of feelings? Ryan's voice was careful, controlled. The kind that make it hard to breathe when you're near. The kind that make me replay every conversation we've had, looking for signs of what you might be thinking. The kind that make me want things I have no right to want. Nora forced herself to meet his eyes. I'm in love with you, Ryan. I've been in love with you since the first week I arrived, and I've been trying to hide it because I thought you only saw me as a friend or a responsibility. But I can't keep hiding it. So there it is. The truth. And if it makes things impossible between us, if you want me to leave, I'll understand. But I had to tell you. For a moment that felt like an eternity, Ryan just stared at her. Then he crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides and cupped her face in his hands. You impossible woman, he said, and his voice was rough with emotion. I've been in love with you since the moment you made that crack about me flying you to the next town. You were sunburned and exhausted and probably terrified, but you still had fire in you. Spirit. I knew right then that you were special. Then why did you pull away? Nora asked, her own hands coming up to grip his wrists. Why did you make it clear that we were just friends? Because I didn't want you to feel obligated to me. Because you just escaped one man trying to force you into marriage, and I didn't want to be another man pressuring you for something you might not want to give. Because I thought you needed time and space and freedom, not some lovesick rancher confusing gratitude with affection. It's not gratitude, Nora said fiercely. I know the difference. I'm grateful to your whole family, but I'm only in love with you. There's a distinction. Ryan's thumb traced the curve of her cheek, gentle and reverent. I know that now. But Nora, are you sure? You've been through so much. You've lost your family and your home. I don't want to be a rebound or a safe harbor you'll regret sailing into once the storm has passed. Then you're an idiot, Nora said, with enough affection to take the sting out of the words. Because you're not a safe harbor. You're the storm and the harbor and the journey all at once. You're the first thing I think about when I wake up and the last thing I think about before I sleep. You make me want to be brave. You make me believe I can build a life worth living. And if you don't kiss me in the next 10 seconds, I'm going to lose my nerve entirely and run back to the kitchen. Ryan laughed, a sound of pure joy, and then he was kissing her. His lips were warm and gentle and questioning, asking permission even as he granted his own. Nora answered by rising on her toes and wrapping her arms around his neck, pulling him closer. The kiss deepened, becoming less tentative and more sure, a conversation in touch and taste and breath. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ryan rested his forehead against hers. I love you, he said. I love your strength and your stubbornness, and the way you make biscuits that could make grown men weep. I love how you treat everyone with kindness even though you've been given every reason to be bitter. I love you, Nora Owens, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving it to you. That's a pretty speech, Nora said, her heart so full she thought it might burst. But I should warn you that I come with nothing. No dowry, no family, no prospects. Just myself and the clothes your sister left behind. Then I'm getting the best of the bargain, Ryan said simply, because you're all I want. They talked for hours that night, sitting in the hay loft with a lantern between them, sharing the stories of their lives in the detailed, meandering way of people who want to know everything about each other. Ryan told her about growing up on the ranch, about his dreams of expanding the operation and improving the quality of their cattle breed. Nora told him about her childhood, about her mother's quiet sadness and her father's increasing desperation as his gambling debts mounted. They talked about the future they might build together and the challenges they would face. "We'll have to do this properly," Ryan said as midnight approached. "I need to court you, take you to town dances and church socials. Let people see that we're together by choice, not circumstance. And then, when enough time has passed that no one can claim you were coerced or rushed, I'm going to ask you to marry me." "How much time?" Nora asked. "However long it takes for you to be certain, months if necessary, a year. I'm not going to hurry you. What if I'm already certain?" Ryan smiled and kissed her forehead. "Then we'll still wait a few months, because I want to do this right. I want to give you the courtship and wedding you deserve, not something hurried or secretive. I want the whole territory to know that Nora Owens chose me, and I was lucky enough that she said yes. You're very sure of yourself, Mr. Ingram. I'm very sure of us, Miss Owens. There's a difference." When they finally emerged from the barn, the house was dark and everyone had gone to bed. Ryan walked Nora to the bunkhouse door, kissed her once more, and then reluctantly let her go. "Tomorrow," he said, "we'll tell my parents, and the day after we'll go into town and I'll introduce you properly to the community, as my intended if you'll have me." "I'll have you," Nora promised. "Today, tomorrow, and every day after that." She floated into her room, too happy to sleep, and lay in the darkness grinning like a fool. Everything had changed in the space of a few hours. She was loved. She was chosen. She had found not just sanctuary but home. The next morning, Ryan announced their courtship at breakfast. The reaction was mixed. Margaret hugged them both, tears of joy streaming down her face. Robert shook his son's hand and welcomed Nora to the family with gruff warmth. The ranch hands cheered and offered congratulations, liberally mixed with teasing about Ryan's long face over the past weeks. But Nora noticed a few concerned looks as well, particularly from Tom, the oldest hand. After breakfast, Tom approached her as she was clearing plates. "Miss Owens, might I have a word?" They stepped out onto the porch and Tom removed his hat, turning it in his weathered hands. "I mean no disrespect, miss, and I'm happy for you and the boss, but I wanted to give you a friendly warning. News travels fast in these parts, and there are those in Walla Walla who might not take kindly to hearing that you found happiness so quick after leaving." Nora's stomach clenched. "My father, you mean, or Cyrus Melbourne? Could be either. Could be both. A man like Melbourne doesn't like being refused, and he's got enough money and influence to cause trouble if he's of a mind to. And your father owes him a considerable debt, which might make him willing to help collect what Melbourne thinks is owed." Tom's expression was sympathetic, but serious. "I'm not saying they'll do anything, but I think you and Ryan should be aware that there might be complications ahead." "Thank you for the warning," Nora said quietly. "I'll talk to Ryan about it." She did that afternoon when they took a walk along the creek that ran through the property. Ryan listened without interruption, his face growing increasingly grim. "Tom's right to be cautious," he said when she finished. "Melbourne's reputation precedes him. He's a hard man who's used to getting what he wants. But Nora, you need to understand something. You're under my protection now, and that of the entire Running Eye Ranch. Anyone who wants to harm you will have to go through all of us first, and I don't intend to make that easy for them. I don't want to bring trouble to your family, Nora said, fear clawing at her newfound happiness. Maybe we should keep our courtship quiet for a while longer, not advertise it in town. Absolutely not, Ryan said firmly. Hiding makes it look like we have something to be ashamed of, and we don't. You made a choice to refuse Melbourne, and you had every right to make that choice. If he or your father want to contest it, they can try. But they'll find that the law and decent public opinion are on our side, not theirs. Despite his confident words, Nora could see the concern in his eyes. That evening, she overheard him talking to his father in the study, discussing what precautions they should take. Extra vigilance when riding the property lines. Making sure Nora was never alone when she went to town. Perhaps hiring an additional hand or two to increase their numbers. The preparations frightened Nora more than they comforted her, because they meant Ryan and his father took the threat seriously. She went to bed that night with her happiness tempered by worry, and her dreams were troubled by images of her father's angry face and Cyrus Melbourne's cold eyes. But in the morning, Ryan was waiting for her with a smile and a kiss, and he insisted they go through with their planned trip to town. We're not going to let fear rule our lives, he said. That's not living, that's just existing. So they rode to Walla Walla together in the ranch wagon, with Margaret coming along to do shopping and lend propriety to the outing. The town was busy with Saturday commerce, and Nora felt exposed as they walked down the main street. Every glance from a passerby seemed like judgment. Every whisper might be about her. But Ryan held her hand openly, and Margaret chatted cheerfully about inconsequential things, and gradually, Nora began to relax. They stopped at the general store, where Ryan introduced her to the proprietor as his intended. They visited the church, where the minister congratulated them and invited them to announce their engagement during Sunday services. They had lunch at a small restaurant, where several ranchers from neighboring properties stopped by their table to offer good wishes. It was only as they were preparing to leave that trouble found them. Cyrus Melbourne was standing by their wagon when they emerged from the mercantile, his bulk blocking the way. He was exactly as Nora remembered, large, red-faced, with small eyes that held no warmth. Her father stood slightly behind him, not meeting her gaze. "Well," Melbourne said, his voice carrying across the street, "if it isn't the ungrateful little girl who thinks she's too good for honest work." Ryan stepped in front of Nora, his body language shifting into something protective and dangerous. "Mr. Melbourne, you're standing by my wagon. Please move aside. Your wagon? That's interesting. I heard that you're harboring a runaway, a woman who owes a debt to me." Melbourne's eyes flicked to Nora. Her father agreed to a contract. She was to marry me in exchange for settling his gambling debts. She broke that contract when she ran away. "There was no contract," Ryan said coldly. "Marriage requires the consent of both parties, and Miss Owens never gave her consent. You have no claim on her, legal or otherwise. Her father gave his consent, and a daughter owes obedience to her father." Melbourne took a step forward. "I've been patient, but my patience is ending. She needs to come back to Walla Walla and fulfill her obligations." "Over my dead body," Ryan said, and there was no hint of compromise in his voice. "That can be arranged," Melbourne replied. The street had gone quiet, people stopping to watch the confrontation. Margaret's hand found Nora's and squeezed tight. Nora wanted to speak to defend herself, but her voice seemed trapped in her throat. It was her father who broke the tension. "Nora," he said, finally looking at her, "come home. We can work this out. Melbourne is a reasonable man. He'll treat you well if you just stop being so stubborn." The pain of hearing her father's voice was physical, a knife twisting in her chest. But beneath the pain was anger, hot and bright. "I am home," she said, finding her voice. I'm with people who value me for more than my usefulness in settling a debt. I'm with people who would never sell their daughter to cover their own mistakes. Her father flinched as if she had struck him. You watch your tongue, girl. I'm still your father. No, Nora said, and the word rang with finality. You stopped being my father when you threw me out of your house for refusing to sacrifice myself for your gambling habits. I owe you nothing. I owe Mr. Melbourne nothing, and I'm not going anywhere with either of you. Melbourne's face darkened with rage. You stupid little. He didn't finish the sentence because Ryan hit him. It was a short, efficient punch that sent Melbourne stumbling back against the wagon wheel. Before Melbourne could recover, Ryan had him by the collar. You will not speak to her that way, Ryan said, his voice deadly quiet. In fact, you won't speak to her at all. Miss Owens has made her position clear. If you attempt to contact her again, if you threaten her or anyone sheltering her, I will ensure that every rancher and businessman in this territory knows what kind of man you are. A man who tries to buy unwilling brides. A man who threatens women. That's not a reputation that will serve you well in these parts. The sheriff, drawn by the commotion, arrived at that moment. He was a lean man in his 50s with a badge pinned to his vest and a no-nonsense expression. What's going on here? Mr. Melbourne was just leaving, Ryan said, releasing Melbourne's collar. He had some confusion about Miss Owens' circumstances, but I've clarified matters for him. The sheriff looked between them, clearly piecing together the situation from context and probably prior knowledge of Melbourne's character. That true, Melbourne? You leaving? Melbourne straightened his coat, his face mottled with rage and humiliation. This isn't over, he said to Ryan. Then he turned and walked away, not looking back. Nora's father hesitated, seemed about to speak, then thought better of it and followed Melbourne down the street. The sheriff tipped his hat to Nora. Miss Owens, if that man bothers you again, you come straight to me. I don't hold with forced marriages or men who can't take no for an answer. He glanced at Ryan. Try not to hit people in my town, Ingram, even when they deserve it. I'll do my best, Sheriff, Ryan said. As they drove home, Margaret kept up a steady stream of reassuring conversation while Ryan held the reins with white-knuckled hands. Nora sat between them, shaking with delayed reaction. When they reached the ranch, Ryan helped her down from the wagon and simply held her while she trembled. It's over, he murmured into her hair. He can't hurt you. I won't let him. But Nora knew better. Men like Cyrus Melbourne didn't accept defeat gracefully. She had humiliated him in front of the entire town, and Ryan had physically struck him. Melbourne would want revenge, and he had the money and influence to make trouble for them. She was right to be worried. 3 days later, a man arrived at the ranch claiming to be a territorial marshal. He had papers, he said, that gave him authority to take Nora into custody on charges of theft. When Ryan demanded to know what she had supposedly stolen, the marshal claimed that she had taken items belonging to her father when she left Walla Walla. That's absurd, Ryan said. She left with nothing but the clothes on her back. She can barely stand at the clothes. Nevertheless, there's been a complaint filed and I have to investigate. The marshal was polite but firm. Miss Owens will need to come with me to answer questions. Then I'm coming too, Ryan said, and we're bringing a lawyer. It took 2 days to sort out the mess. The lawyer, a sharp-minded man from Walla Walla who had no love for Melbourne, quickly established that the charges were fabricated. There was no evidence of theft, no itemized list of missing property, nothing but the word of Nora's father, who couldn't keep his story straight under questioning. The territorial marshal, once he understood how he had been manipulated, apologized to Nora and warned her father and Melbourne that filing false charges was itself a crime. But the damage was done. Nora's reputation had been questioned publicly. Rumors spread through Walla Walla and the surrounding ranches. She was a thief. She was ungrateful. She had seduced young Ryan Ingram to secure a position for herself. The gossip was vicious and baseless, but it spread nonetheless. Margaret raged about it. Robert wrote letters to people of influence setting the record straight, and Ryan wanted to confront everyone spreading lies. But Nora, exhausted and heartsick, just wanted it to be over. "Maybe I should leave," she said to Ryan one evening. They were sitting on the porch of the main house, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. "Go to another territory where Melbourne's reach doesn't extend. Start fresh somewhere he can't find me." "No," Ryan said flatly. "Running away won't solve anything. Melbourne will just view it as a victory, and you'll be alone again. Is that what you want?" "I want you and your family to stop suffering because of me," Nora said miserably. "I've brought nothing but trouble since the day you found me on that road." Ryan turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "You've brought joy into my life. You've brought love and laughter and a reason to wake up excited every morning. You've brought light into this house. So yes, there's been some trouble along with it, but I'd face down 100 Cyrus Melbournes to keep you here. Don't you understand that?" "I understand that I love you too much to let you sacrifice everything for me," Nora whispered. "Then you don't understand anything," Ryan said, and he kissed her with a desperation that spoke of his own fears. "I'm not sacrificing anything. I'm fighting for my future, our future. And I'm not going to stop fighting just because some bitter man wants to punish you for having the courage to say no." The battle, such as it was, continued through September and into October. Melbourne tried different tactics, questioning the ranch's water rights, claiming ownership of cattle that bore the Running Eye brand, spreading rumors about Ryan's father's business practices. Each attack was met and defeated, but the constant vigilance was wearing on everyone. It was Margaret who finally found the solution, or rather, the information that led to a solution. She attended a church social in town and overheard several women talking about Melbourne's former wives. Both women had died young, and both deaths had been attributed to illness or accident. But one of the women, speaking in hushed tones, suggested that there might have been more to the story. Margaret brought this information to Robert, who made discreet inquiries. What he discovered was damning. Melbourne's first wife had died of injuries sustained in a fall down the stairs, though neighbors had reported hearing arguments before the fall. His second wife had died in childbirth, but the midwife who attended her had noted suspicious bruising and signs of mistreatment. Neither death had been investigated thoroughly because Melbourne had influence and money, and the women had no family to advocate for them. Robert took this information to the sheriff and to the territorial judge. Together, they confronted Melbourne with the evidence and made it clear that any further harassment of Nora Owens or the Ingram family would result in a formal investigation into the deaths of his former wives. Melbourne, faced with the threat of public scandal and possible criminal charges, backed down. He left Walla Walla shortly thereafter, selling his mine and moving to Montana. Nora's father, without Melbourne's support, disappeared back into obscurity. Nora heard, months later, that he had died of pneumonia the following winter. She mourned him, but distantly, as one mourns a stranger. The man who had raised her had died long before his body gave out, killed by gambling and desperation and bad choices. With the threat gone, life at the Running Eye Ranch returned to normal. The cattle drive happened in late October, with Ryan gone for 2 weeks to deliver their herd to the railhead. Nora missed him terribly, but kept busy with preserving and preparing the ranch for winter. When he returned, he swept her into his arms and kissed her in front of everyone, not caring who saw. "I thought about you every day," he said. "Every single day, and I realized that I don't want to wait anymore. I know we said we'd have a proper courtship, but Nora, I already know everything I need to know. I love you, I want to marry you. Will you please put me out of my misery and say yes?" "Yes," Nora said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, yes, yes." They were married in November, in the small church in Walla Walla with half the territory in attendance. Nora wore a dress that Margaret and Sarah had made together, white silk with lace at the collar and cuffs. Ryan wore a new suit and looked so handsome that Nora could barely believe he was real. They spoke their vows in clear, strong voices, promising to love and cherish each other for all their days. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the barn and music provided by Sam on his fiddle, and several friends who brought guitars and a banjo. They danced until midnight, and when Ryan swept Nora into his arms for the final waltz, she felt like she was floating. "Happy," he whispered into her ear. "Beyond measure," she whispered back. They spent their wedding night in the main house, in the room that had been prepared for them. Ryan was gentle and patient, and Nora discovered that love could be expressed in touch and breath and the joining of two bodies as well as in words. They learned each other in the darkness, and when they finally fell asleep, it was tangled together, unable to bear even the smallest distance. The years that followed were good ones. Hard, because ranch life was always hard, but good. Nora continued to cook for the ranch hands and help Margaret with the endless tasks required to keep the household running. Ryan and his father expanded the ranch, buying additional land and improving their stock. They weathered droughts and harsh winters, market fluctuations and the occasional disaster, but they faced everything together. In the spring of 1884, Nora gave birth to their first child, a son they named Robert after Ryan's father. The baby had his father's dark hair and his mother's gray hazel eyes, and he was loved beyond reason by everyone on the ranch. Margaret doted on her grandson, and even the rough ranch hands became gentle when holding the infant. Ryan was a devoted father, taking time away from ranch work to help with the baby and give Nora rest. He would walk the floor at night when Robert cried, singing to him in a low voice until the baby settled. He changed diapers without complaint and made Nora laugh by narrating his son's expressions in ridiculous voices. "He's going to be a rancher," Ryan would say, holding Robert up to look at the cattle. "See, he's already evaluating the stock." "He's 3 months old," Nora would reply. "He's probably just trying to figure out why those big creatures make so much noise." 2 years later, a daughter joined the family. They named her Margaret, after Ryan's mother, but called her Maggie from the start. She was a sweet-tempered baby with blonde hair like her grandmother Sarah, and a smile that could light up the darkest day. Robert, now a busy toddler, was fascinated by his little sister and wanted to help with everything. Though his help often created more work than it saved, life settled into a rhythm of seasons and growth. The children thrived, growing strong and healthy in the clean air and open spaces of the ranch. Nora taught them their letters and numbers at the kitchen table, while Ryan taught them to ride and care for animals. Robert Sr. and Margaret Sr. aged gracefully, still active but gradually turning over more responsibility to Ryan and Nora. Sarah visited from Portland sometimes, bringing her own growing family, and the house would fill with the chaos and joy of cousins playing together. The ranch hands came and went over the years, but there was always a core group who stayed, becoming part of the extended family. In 1889, 7 years after that fateful day on the road, Ryan and Nora sat on their porch watching their children play in the yard. Robert was 8 now, tall for his age, and already showing signs of becoming the strong, capable man he would grow into. Maggie was 5, all energy and curiosity, chasing chickens and asking endless questions about everything. "Do you ever think about that day?" Ryan asked, his arm around Nora's shoulders. "The day I found you on the road." "Every day," Nora admitted. "I think about how frightened I was, how certain I was that my life was over. And then you rode up and offered me hope." "You offered yourself hope," Ryan corrected. "When you refused to marry Melbourne, when you chose to walk into the unknown rather than accept a life you didn't want. I just happened to be the one lucky enough to find you. We found each other," Nora said, leaning into his warmth. "And I'm grateful for every moment since." Robert called out from the yard, asking his father to come see something he had discovered near the creek. Ryan kissed Nora's forehead and went to investigate, leaving her alone with her thoughts. She watched her husband crouch down to examine whatever treasure their son had found, his patience and attention never wavering. She thought about the girl she had been, cast out and terrified, walking down a dusty road with no destination and no plan. She thought about all the ways that story could have ended badly, in violence, in despair, in a different kind of trap than the one she had fled. But instead, that road had led her here, to love and family and a life richer than anything she could have imagined. The sunset was painting the sky in brilliant colors, gold and rose and deep purple. The mountains stood as eternal witnesses, solid and unchanging. And in the yard, her children's laughter mixed with her husband's voice, creating a music sweeter than any song. Nora smiled, her heart full to bursting. She had been banished for refusing to marry, and a cowboy had found her on the road and offered sanctuary. But more than sanctuary, he had offered love. And in accepting that love, in choosing to fight for it and defend it and nurture it through all the challenges life brought, she had found her truest home. The years continued to pass, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and the milestones of a growing family. In 1891, Nora gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl they named Samuel and Sophie. The pregnancy had been difficult, and the birth even more so, leaving Nora weak and needing weeks of recovery. Ryan had been terrified, hovering over her constantly until she finally told him she would recover faster if he would stop treating her like she was made of glass. "I survived being banished," she reminded him. "I survived walking alone on that road. I survived facing down Cyrus Melbourne. I can survive childbirth." "I know you're strong," Ryan said, his voice rough with emotion. "But you're also the most important person in my world, and the thought of losing you terrifies me." "Then I'll make you a promise," Nora said, taking his hand. "I promise to take care of myself, to rest when I need rest, and to ask for help when I need help. And you promise to trust that I know my own limits." It was a promise they both kept. Nora recovered slowly but surely, and the twins thrived despite their early arrival. Samuel was quiet and observant, while Sophie was bold and adventurous. Between the 4 children and the ranch work, life was chaotic and exhausting and absolutely perfect. Robert Sr. passed away peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1893. He was 72 years old and had lived to see his grandchildren grow, and the ranch he had built continue to prosper. The funeral was well attended, with neighboring ranchers and townspeople coming to pay their respects to a man who had been respected and loved throughout the community. Margaret mourned, but without bitterness. "We had 43 years together," she told Nora. "That's more than many people get. I won't waste what time I have left on regrets." She lived another 5 years, remaining active in the ranch life until the very end. She taught her grandchildren to bake and garden, told them stories of the early days when the territory was wild and unsettled, and filled their lives with wisdom and love. When she died in her sleep in 1898, Nora grieved as deeply as if she had lost her own mother. Margaret had been the first to welcome her, the first to see her value beyond her usefulness, and the one who had encouraged her to be brave enough to claim her own happiness. With both parents gone, Ryan became the undisputed head of the ranch. But he and Nora ran it as partners, making decisions together and dividing responsibilities according to their strengths. Nora managed the household and the finances, proving to have a sharp head for numbers and investments. Ryan oversaw the ranch operations and the cattle breeding program he had spent years developing. The children grew into capable young people. Robert, serious and thoughtful like his father, took to ranching naturally and was already helping with the major decisions by the time he was 15. Maggie, bright and social, loved visiting town and helping with the community events that brought neighbors together. The twins, Samuel and Sophie, were inseparable despite their different temperaments, always involved in some scheme or adventure. In 1899, as the century drew to a close, the family gathered for a photograph. Ryan and Nora sat in the center, their 17 years of marriage evident in the comfortable way they leaned toward each other. Around them stood their children, Robert at 15, tall and strong, Maggie at 12 on the cusp of young womanhood, and the twins at 8, still children but showing hints of the adults they would become. The photographer, a traveling man who made his circuit through the rural areas, arranged them carefully. "Look at the camera," he instructed, "and try not to move for a few seconds." But just as he was about to take the picture, Sophie whispered something to Samuel that made him laugh. The photographer sighed and reset his equipment, but Ryan just smiled. "Let her laugh," he said. "That's who we are. That's what this family is about." So the photograph, when it was finally taken, showed a family that was relaxed and happy, with Sophie grinning mischievously and Samuel trying not to laugh. It was a portrait not of formal respectability but of genuine joy, and it became one of Nora's most treasured possessions. That same year, Robert met a girl at a church social. Her name was Emily, and she was the daughter of a neighboring rancher. She was 16, pretty and practical, with a no-nonsense attitude that matched Robert's serious nature. Ryan and Nora watched the courtship with mixed feelings, pride that their son was growing up, and sadness that their time with him as a child was ending. "They're so young," Nora said, watching Robert and Emily walk together after church. "We were young once too," Ryan reminded her. "Not much older than them, really, and look how well we turned out." "We had to fight for what we have," Nora said. "I want them to have it easier." "Life is never easy," Ryan said, "but if we've taught them anything, I hope it's that the things worth having are worth fighting for." Robert and Emily married in 1901 when he was 18 and she was 17. It was a smaller wedding than Ryan and Nora's had been, but no less joyful. They built a house on the ranch land, not far from the main house, and began their own life together. A year later, they gave Ryan and Nora their first grandchild, a boy they named Ryan Robert. Holding her grandson for the first time, Nora was overwhelmed by the sense of continuity and legacy. This child was part of a family that had taken her in when she had nothing. He would grow up knowing love and security, would never be cast aside or treated as property to be traded. The cycle of pain that had marked her childhood had been broken, and in its place was something strong and good and lasting. "What are you thinking?" Ryan asked, coming to stand beside her as she held the baby. "I'm thinking about roads," Nora said. "About how sometimes the worst moments in our lives lead us to the best destinations. About how getting lost is sometimes the only way to find where we truly belong." Ryan wrapped his arms around both her and the baby, creating a circle of warmth and protection. "You were never lost," he said. "You just hadn't found home yet." As the new century progressed, the ranch continued to thrive. New technologies arrived: better barbed wire, improved windmills, eventually even a telephone line that connected them to the town. The children grew and pursued their own paths. Maggie became a teacher, though she continued to live on the ranch and teach at the nearby schoolhouse. Samuel developed an interest in veterinary medicine and went away to school, eventually returning to provide animal care for the ranch and surrounding properties. Sophie, true to her adventurous nature, announced her intention to attend college in Seattle, scandalizing some neighbors but making her parents proud. Through all the changes, Ryan and Nora remained the steady center. They aged gracefully together, their hair turning gray and their faces acquiring the lines that came from years of squinting into the sun and smiling at each other. Their love, tested early and often, had deepened into something unshakable. They knew each other's thoughts before they were spoken, could communicate with a glance across a crowded room, and still took pleasure in the simple act of sitting together at the end of a long day. In 1910, 28 years after their first meeting on that dusty road, they threw a party to celebrate their anniversary. The ranch was filled with family and friends. 3 generations gathered to honor the couple who had built something lasting out of an act of simple kindness and mutual courage. Sarah had come from Portland with her family. The ranch hands, some of whom had been with them for decades, raised toasts and told embarrassing stories. The grandchildren ran wild through the property, their shouts of joy echoing off the mountains. And at the center of it all were Ryan and Nora, holding hands like newlyweds, still choosing each other above all others. As the evening wound down and the guests began to depart, Ryan pulled Nora aside to the spot where they had first declared their love all those years ago. The barn had been rebuilt twice since then, but the location was the same, and the memories were strong. "Do you remember standing here and telling me you loved me?" Ryan asked. "You were so scared, but you said it anyway." "I remember thinking I might die of terror before I got the words out," Nora admitted. "But I also remember thinking that some things are more frightening than death, like living without ever knowing if you felt the same way." "Best risk you ever took," Ryan said, pulling her close. "Second best," Nora corrected. "The best risk I ever took was refusing to marry Cyrus Melbourne. That's what led to everything else." "Then I'm grateful to you for your stubbornness," Ryan said, "and grateful to whatever twist of fate put you on that road the exact moment I was riding by. Though I'd like to think I would have found you eventually, even if it had taken longer." "We found each other," Nora said, echoing the words she had spoken years before. "And we kept finding each other every day since. That's the real miracle, not the beginning but the continuing." They stood together in the fading light, surrounded by the physical evidence of the life they had built. The ranch buildings, the grazing cattle, the house where their children had grown and their grandchildren now played. But more important than any physical structure was the intangible legacy they had created. A family rooted in love rather than obligation, in choice rather than coercion, in partnership rather than domination. The years continued their steady march. World events touched their lives. A distant war in Europe, the women's suffrage movement that Sophie championed vocally, the Spanish flu that swept through in 1918 and touched, but did not devastate their family. Through it all, the ranch endured and the family grew. More grandchildren arrived and eventually great-grandchildren. The original 4 children became parents and then grandparents themselves, carrying forward the values and love that Ryan and Nora had established. In 1925, 43 years after their marriage, Ryan fell ill. It started as a persistent cough and progressed to pneumonia. He fought it with the same stubborn determination that had characterized his whole life. But he was 70 years old, and his body, worn from decades of hard work, could not recover. Nora nursed him through it, never leaving his side, holding his hand and talking to him about their life together. "I would do it all again," Ryan said in one of his lucid moments. "Every single moment, even the hard parts, especially the hard parts because they led us here." "Don't talk like you're saying goodbye," Nora said, though tears streamed down her face. "You're going to recover. You have to recover." "Nora, love, we both know that's not true." Ryan's hand, which had always been so strong, felt fragile in hers. "But listen to me. I'm not afraid. I've had a life beyond my wildest dreams. I've loved you for 43 years, and I'll love you beyond death and into whatever comes after. You made me the happiest man alive. Don't ever forget that." He died that night, peacefully, with Nora holding his hand and their children gathered around the bed. The funeral was enormous, with people coming from across the state to pay their respects to a man who had been a pillar of his community and a friend to many. But for Nora, it was intensely personal grief. She had lost her partner, her best friend, the other half of her heart. The months after Ryan's death were the darkest of Nora's life, worse even than those early days of banishment. She went through the motions of living. She cooked and cleaned and helped with the grandchildren, but the joy had gone out of everything. The ranch, which had always felt like home, now felt like a museum of memories, every corner reminding her of Ryan's absence. It was Robert, her eldest, who finally pulled her out of her grief. He came to her one morning as she sat on the porch staring at nothing. "Mom," he said gently, "I need to ask you something. When you were young, before you met Dad, you made a choice that changed your life. You chose freedom over security, the unknown over the comfortable prison. You were brave then. Can you be brave now?" "What do you mean?" Nora asked. "I mean, don't give up. Don't let grief kill the woman who was strong enough to walk away from everything she knew. Dad wouldn't want that. He'd want you to keep living, to keep finding joy, to keep being the person he fell in love with all those years ago." Robert was right, and Nora knew it. So she made another choice as deliberate as the one she had made at 21. She chose to live. Not just to exist, but to actively engage with life and find meaning in her remaining years. She threw herself into her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, telling them stories of the old days and passing on the history that they might otherwise lose. She worked in the garden and continued to cook for the ranch hands, finding satisfaction in feeding people and making them happy. She wrote letters to Sophie in Seattle and visited Maggie at the schoolhouse. She let herself remember Ryan with joy rather than only sorrow, celebrating what they had shared rather than focusing on what was lost. The years were kinder after that. Nora lived to see her 70th birthday, then her 75th. The ranch continued under Robert's capable management, and the family continued to grow. She became a great-great-grandmother, holding infants who would carry her legacy into a future she could barely imagine. In 1932, at the age of 71, Nora sat on the porch of the main house and looked out over the land that had been her home for 50 years. The ranch had changed. There were automobiles now instead of just horses, electric lights had replaced the lanterns, and the railroad that had once been a distant destination now stopped in a town less than 10 miles away. But the essential character of the place remained. It was still the running eye, still a working cattle ranch, still home to multiple generations of family. A car drove up the road and Nora smiled. It was Maggie, coming for their weekly visit. Her daughter was now 50 years old, gray-haired and dignified, with children and grandchildren of her own. But to Nora, she would always be the sweet baby with the sunshine smile. "Hello, Mama," Maggie said, settling into the chair beside her mother. "How are you feeling today?" "Old," Nora said honestly, "but content. I was just thinking about your father and about the day we met." "Tell me again," Maggie said. She had heard the story countless times, but she never tired of it. So Nora told it again, the story that had become legend in their family. About a young woman who refused to marry, about being banished and walking alone, about a cowboy who offered sanctuary and ended up offering so much more. She told about falling in love and fighting for that love, about building a life and a family from nothing but determination and mutual devotion. "That's the best love story I've ever heard," Maggie said when Nora finished, just as she always did. "It's not a story," Nora replied, as she always did. "It's my life. And it was very real, every beautiful, difficult, wonderful moment of it." Later, after Maggie left and the house grew quiet, Nora stood at the window and watched the sunset. The mountains were still there, eternal and unchanging. The cattle grazed peacefully in the pastures. And somewhere in the memory of this land was a young woman walking down a dusty road, not knowing that she was about to find everything she never knew she needed. "Thank you," Nora whispered to the universe, to fate, to whatever force had put Ryan Ingram on that road at precisely the right moment. "Thank you for the life I got to live." She lived for 3 more years, passing away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 74. Her funeral was as large as Ryan's had been, filled with children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren, all of them products of the love story that had started on a dusty road in 1882. They buried her beside Ryan on a hillside overlooking the ranch, under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. The headstone was simple: Nora Owens Ingram, 1861–1935, beloved wife, mother, and friend. But the true memorial to her life was not carved in stone. It was in the faces of the people gathered to mourn her, in the ranch that continued to thrive, in the values of courage and love and partnership that she had passed down through the generations. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, people claimed they could see 2 figures walking together near the creek, holding hands and laughing. They said it was Ryan and Nora, still choosing each other, still finding joy in each other's company. Whether it was truth or fancy didn't really matter. Because the real truth was simpler and more powerful. That love, when it is real and chosen and fought for, transcends everything. Even death, even time, even the passage of 100 years. The Running Eye Ranch still stands today, still owned and operated by Ingram descendants. And in the main house, hanging in a place of honor, is a photograph of a young woman and a cowboy, taken on their wedding day in 1882. She looks strong and beautiful, her eyes clear and determined. He looks proud and happy, his hand resting protectively on her shoulder. And anyone looking at that photograph can see what everyone who knew them always saw: that these 2 people had found something rare and precious, something worth celebrating long after they were gone. It started with a choice. It continued with courage. And it lasted forever. Proof that the best love stories are not the easy ones, but the ones where both people choose to stay, to fight, to love through whatever challenges arise. That is the legacy of Nora Owens and Ryan Ingram, and it lives on in every descendant who knows their story and strives to love with the same fierce, determined, joyful devotion.